My name is Robin, and I celebrated my 26th birthday a few weeks ago. Life was wonderful as it can be when you're in your early 20s. You have a job that doesn't annoy you, friends who are willing to support you, and a man you're going to spend the rest of your life with. I was engaged to Jake, my college sweetheart, and our wedding was already looming on the horizon, promising a fabulous future where everything would be simple, calm, and predictable. Nothing seemed to be able to disrupt this harmony, until my mother decided to step in, turning my carefully thought out idyll into another performance in which, as it turned out, I was just a prop. I was sprawled out on the couch, flipping through a wedding magazine, lost in thought about the upcoming celebration, about the flowers that will decorate the hall, about the music to which Jake and I will dance our first dance, when the phone rang. Mom's name popped up on the screen, and I froze for a moment, wondering if I should answer. But knowing her, I knew that if I didn't pick up the phone now, she would call again and again until I gave up. "Hi, Mom, how are you?" I tried to sound cheerful, but inside I was already preparing for something unexpected. "Robin, dear. I need your opinion." Her voice was agitated, too animated, and it immediately alerted me. "Which costume do you think will look better on Tom when he walks you down the aisle?" "I think maybe blue, but maybe black would be a more traditional option." I blinked in confusion, not immediately realizing the meaning of what was said. "Mom, what are you talking about?" "Grandpa leads me down the aisle." There was a pause on the other end, as if she really didn't understand what the problem was. "What?" "No, Tom is doing it. He has a teenage daughter, and he wants to practice to feel confident when it's her turn." I sat up abruptly, forgetting about the magazine, forgetting even how to breathe. "Mom, I'm not some kind of dress rehearsal for your boyfriend." The words came out of my mouth before I could think them through. "But Robin, it's just a symbolic gesture." "The bride's moment is not a symbolic gesture, it's an important day in my life. Grandpa leads me down the aisle." The end of the story. "But Tom." "I don't care about Tom." I screamed so loudly that even I was surprised at the intensity of my anger. "I'm not going to be his guinea pig. If he really wants to rehearse, let him find another wedding to ruin." "Robin Elizabeth Carter, you listen to me." I ended the call without even listening to it, and threw the phone aside as if it had burned my palm. Almost immediately, the screen lit up again. Mom didn't give up. I balled my fingers into a fist, ignoring the bell, and stared at the wall while everything inside me was boiling. My heart was pounding in my chest, and along with this frantic rhythm, memories began to roll in. My father's face, his warm smile, how he rocked me on the swing in our yard, how he laughed when I played in the mud, and my mother swore that I would have to change clothes. He died when I was 10, leaving behind a gaping hole that my mother desperately tried to fill with something, but could never. I remembered that endless parade of men passing through our house, the truckers from the transportation company where she worked, the men she introduced to me as her future husbands, my future stepfathers. None of them stayed long. Mom was too obsessive, too eager for love, and they ran away, unable to stand it. And then the next Mr. Forever appeared, which in the end also turned out to be temporary. As a child, I always found salvation with my grandparents. Their house was my refuge, an oasis of stability in the midst of the chaos that was going on with us. Especially in adolescence, when the situation really started to get out of control. I was 13 when one day, returning from school, I saw my mother in a furious quarrel with some strange woman right in the middle of our living room. "You are a destroyer of families." The stranger screamed, her face flushed with rage. "This is my husband." Mom didn't back down. "He told me he was lonely. Don't blame me for your marital problems." I froze in the doorway, feeling an icy wave of fear wash over my head. And there, lounging in our battered armchair, was Mom's last boyfriend. I think his name was Dave. Or Dan. I couldn't keep track of their names anymore. He watched the quarrel with a smug grin, as if it was some kind of entertainment in which he was starring. My backpack slid off my shoulder, hitting the floor with a thud. "Mom?" My voice was shaking. Both women stopped talking and turned to me. The stranger's eyes widened, then narrowed. "Is this your daughter?" She spat out the words as if the very thought disgusted her. "Leave her alone," Mom said. "Does she know what kind of woman her mother is? Get out of my house." But the stranger didn't leave. She glanced at the man, who was sipping a beer with a lazy grin, and gave a strangled cry, as if she finally realized that she had become another puppet in this theater. She rushed forward, and I took advantage of the moment to run into my room and lock the door. And all I could do was wait for the screams to subside. That night, lying in bed in the tiny room that I used to call my own, I heard my mother crying. Her sobs through the thin walls of our apartment were muffled but persistent, like raindrops monotonously tapping on the windowsill. Oren, her last dream man, left, taking his wife with him, and Mom was left alone again. At the time, it seemed to me that this was just another episode in a series of endless dramas that filled her life. But looking back, I realized that something broke in me at that moment. I realized that I no longer want to be a part of this chaos. I don't want to watch my mother cling to everyone she meets over and over again, just not to be alone. I don't want to see how she allows all these people to come and go without thinking about how I feel. But the older I got, the worse the situation became. By the age of 15, I was already doing everything possible to spend as little time at home as possible. It wasn't just that I didn't want to witness the endless carousel of my mom's boyfriends, but also the way they looked at me. One of them, Rick, I especially remember for his disgusting grin when I went into the kitchen for a snack one day. His eyes lazily ran over me from head to toe, as if assessing a product in a store. "Your girl has plumped up beautifully," he told Mom, not even bothering to talk about me in the third person. Mom just laughed and, ignoring how much I wanted to just disappear, said with pride, "She's just like me." I remember how I froze in place, feeling everything inside me shrink, and then, without saying a word, I turned around and left, leaving the unfinished sandwich on the table. At that moment, I realized that I could no longer be in this house. I started spending more time in the library, with friends, on the street, anywhere, rather than returning to the apartment, where every new day brought with it new people, new views, new hints that my mother either did not notice or preferred to ignore. But she didn't understand why I was trying to avoid the house. She didn't see it as a problem. On the contrary, she thought I was being selfish. "Robin, dear," she said one evening, beaming with joy, as if she had won the lottery, "meet Jeff. He gets along great with kids. We could be such a happy family, the three of us." I shifted my gaze to this Jeff, who, judging by his lazy grin and too long stare, had already managed to form some kind of opinion about me. I felt uneasy, and the only thing I could say before I went to my room was, "No, thank you." That night, curled up in my bed, I stared at the ceiling and thought it was time to make a change. The next morning, while Mom was chatting with someone on the phone, laughing at something I wasn't even trying to understand, I called Grandpa. "Grandpa," I said, trying to hide the tremor in my voice, "can I stay with you for a while?" "Of course, sweet peas." His voice was warm and firm, without a second's hesitation. "You are always welcome here." I didn't know how to tell my mom. I didn't know how to explain to her that I couldn't live like this anymore, that every day in this house was becoming a challenge for me. But in the end, I didn't have to. Grandma and Grandpa figured it out for themselves. One evening, when we were sitting in their kitchen, the words came out of our mouths, as if they had burst out after years of silence. I told her everything, about the men who came and went, about their looks, about my mother's indifference, about how I felt like a stranger in my own house every night. By the time I finished, Grandma had tears in her eyes, and Grandpa looked like he was ready to unleash all his rage on the world. "That's enough," he said, his voice low but as hard as steel. "We'll put an end to this." The next day we went to my mom's house. Grandpa didn't beat around the bush. "Carol," he began, not giving her a chance to interrupt, "what you're doing is immoral and dangerous. You bring strange men into the house without even thinking about what might happen." Mom's face flushed with anger. "How dare you?" she screamed, clenching her fists. "You never wanted me to be happy. Are you trying to ruin my life?" "Your life?" Grandpa raised his eyebrows. "What about Robin's life?" "But what about her safety?" "Great." Mom snorted, crossing her arms over her chest. "You're taking her away from me, aren't you?" Grandpa nodded. "Robin is moving in with us. You can arrange your personal life without putting it at risk." Mom gritted her teeth. "Great. Take her away. It will be even easier to find a good man without a teenager who shackles my style." Her words hit me in the heart. Deep down, I always knew that my mother considered me a burden, that I was only hindering her from building her happy life, but hearing it out loud hurt more than I could have imagined. Grandma gently squeezed my shoulder. "Go pack your things, honey," she said softly. I nodded and headed to my room. A few days later, as I was throwing clothes into my travel bag, I could hear my mom and Grandpa still arguing in the living room. Grandpa's voice was firm but calm. Mom's voice was harsh, filled with anger that she couldn't or wouldn't contain. When I went out into the hallway, Mom was standing at the door with her arms crossed over her chest. "So that's it, huh?" Her voice was icy, and there was resentment in her eyes. "You're choosing them over me." I looked at her. I really looked at her, and for the first time I saw not only the woman who annoyed me, not only the person who disappointed me so many times, but also a lonely, scared person who clung to someone all her life just not to be alone. "I choose myself, Mom," I said softly, feeling a tremor rise inside me. "I hope you'll understand that one day." She didn't answer. She just turned away. When I walked out the door with my grandparents, when we got into the car and drove away from the house where I spent most of my childhood, I did not look back, but in the rearview mirror I watched as the familiar walls gradually disappeared, turning into indistinct outlines, lost among other buildings. I didn't know what lay ahead, but for the first time in many years, I didn't have to strain myself waiting for another quarrel, another outburst of my mother's unpredictability, or the appearance of another man in the house who looked at me in a way no adult should. This feeling of silence, security, and stability was so unusual that I was afraid to believe it was real, as if it were just a brief dream that was about to end. Living with my grandparents was like stepping into another world, in which there was no need to be on guard every minute, fearing that the door would suddenly open and another stranger would enter the house with a smug smile and a cold gaze gliding over me, as if he had the right to do so. Gone were the late-night scandals filled with insults and recriminations. Gone were the men's voices, which at first sounded affectionate, but eventually acquired irritated or bored notes. Gone was the constant tension that forced me to always be on my guard. Instead, I found myself surrounded by love, warmth, and support, which I had to get used to again. I still went to the same school, met the same friends, but something has changed inside of me. I was no longer the girl who clenched her fists, returning home after school, ready for another unpleasant surprise. Now I could focus on my studies without worrying about what or who I would see when I entered the house. Mom. Well, Mom was Mom. She called me from time to time, but never to ask how I was doing, what was new, or if I was happy. Her calls were always about her life, her last boyfriend, her problems at work, her resentments against others, her regrets that never touched me. Sometimes she would ask about me, but I felt like she was doing it more out of politeness than genuine interest, and even when I answered, it seemed to me that she was no longer listening. When the day of my graduation came, I was amazed to see her among the guests. She was sitting next to my grandparents, looking a little out of place, as if she didn't know what place she occupied in this moment of my life. After the ceremony, she came up to me, a faint smile appeared on her face. "You look good, honey," she said, giving me a quick hug, as if she was afraid I would pull away if she stayed even a second longer. "Listen, I have to run. I have a date with a wonderful guy I met at work, you understand, right?" And just like that, she left, leaving behind only a light scent of perfume and a vague feeling of awkwardness. I watched her go, feeling a strange mixture of pain and relief, knowing that to expect anything more from her would be to condemn myself to disappointment again. In the fall, my grandparents helped me move into a dormitory, making sure that I had everything I needed to start a student life. I chose the profession of an investment manager, fascinated by the world of finance and strategic planning, a world in which everything was subject to logic, analysis, and accurate calculation, everything that was so lacking in my life while I lived with my mother. It was at university that I met Jake. We met at an introductory course in financial markets, both freshmen with glowing eyes and heads full of ambition. At first, we were just friends, study buddies who sat in the university coffee shop late into the night, asking each other questions before exams. But in my last year, everything changed. We were working on a group project, hunched over our laptops in the library, when Jake suddenly looked at me, and there was something in his gaze that took my breath away. "Robin," he said, suddenly serious. "I think I'm in love with you." I blinked, trying to process what I'd heard, and then realized I felt the same way. Our relationship blossomed quickly, naturally, as if it was the most right thing that could happen in my life. Jake was kind, smart, reliable, all the things I always missed around my mom, and when he proposed to me after graduation, I didn't hesitate for a second before saying yes. I didn't see my mother very often, usually during short visits home during the holidays. Her new boyfriend, Tom, was always there, younger than her, with slicked back hair and a cocky smile that made me feel uncomfortable. "Robin, this is Tom," she said one day, beaming, as if she were introducing the love of her life to me. "He has a daughter, she's only 7 years younger than you. Isn't that great?" I smiled politely, not knowing what to say. Tom gave me a look that made my insides twist in an unpleasant knot, and I felt uneasy, an all too familiar feeling that I had long hoped to forget. After experiencing this moment, I realized that I needed to talk to my grandfather. One day, Jake and I went to visit my grandparents for the weekend, and all day I had a feeling of heaviness, as if I had to make some important decision. When we were sitting in their cozy living room, I finally spoke. "Grandpa," I said, gathering my courage. "Mom called me about the wedding. She wants her boyfriend Tom to walk me down the aisle. She says she wants him to practice before his own daughter gets married." Grandpa looked at me in silence, then reached out and covered my hand with his. "Robin," he said calmly but firmly, "it would be a great honor for me to walk you down the aisle. But if you had chosen Tom or someone else, would have understood. It's your day, and you have to do what's right for you." I looked at him, at his kind, wise eyes, and for the first time in a long time I felt that I was really safe. I shook my head, feeling tears sting my eyes, squeezing my throat with that familiar lump that always appeared when I had to make a difficult but only right choice. I had no choice. He was always the only person I could imagine next to me at that moment, the only one who deserved this role, the only one who truly deserved the right to walk me down the aisle. "Grandpa," I whispered, my voice trembling, but I continued anyway, not wanting to hide my emotions. "It's always been you." Jake was sitting next to me, his warm, strong hand firmly holding my palm, and I felt like there was boundless support in his touch. He leaned forward slightly, glanced at Grandpa, then looked back at me and nodded, as if confirming that I didn't have to worry about anything. "I support everything Robin wants," he said firmly, then turned to his grandfather and continued, "She told me about everything you've done for her, sir. I can't think of anyone better to give it to." Grandpa's lips twitched in a smile, but there was a telltale moisture in his eyes, and he blinked hastily, as if trying to hide it, cleared his throat and nodded, as if reflecting on Jake's words. "Well," he said at last, his voice a little rough, soaked with emotion, "then I think we'd better start rehearsing our walk, don't you?" We all laughed, and I felt a powerful wave of love and gratitude wash over me, mixed with such a warm sense of calm that I felt only here, only among these people who were my real family, who stood by me, supported me, loved me unconditionally, who were there when Mom turned away when she wasn't interested in my feelings, my fears, or my dreams. And now, after all these years, I was adding another person to this family, Jake, my reliable, kind, sincere man who was always by my side. I thought that this conversation would finally put an end to Mom's ridiculous demands, that now that everything was in place, when I made my decision clear, she would finally leave me alone, but once again I underestimated her persistence. The calls kept coming, each time with increasing urgency, with increasing pressure, as if she was trying to push my will with her own. "You have to change your mind," she pleaded one evening, and I felt my stomach tighten when she started talking about Tom again. "He's very upset. If you don't let him walk you down the aisle, he might leave me." I closed my eyes, trying my best to contain the irritation that was rising in me with renewed vigor, and with an effort I pulled myself together. "Then maybe he's not the right guy for you," I replied calmly, throwing aside the fingerboard I was twirling in my hands, trying to occupy my fingers with something to keep my voice from screaming. "Mom, I'm busy. I'm planning my wedding. Can we please stop this?" There was a tense pause on the other end, and when she spoke again, her voice was icy, sharp as a shard of glass. "Okay, if that's how you want to play it." She paused dramatically to emphasize her words. "Then I won't come to your wedding at all." A click. Something inside me snapped. I was silent for a second, 2, 3, feeling something powerful, unbridled rise in me, something that I had been holding back for years, suppressing in myself, not allowing it to break out. "You know what?" My voice was even, quiet, but I could feel every cell in my body trembling with tension. "Good. Don't come. It's not that surprising, considering that you've never been a real mother to me." I hit the end button before she could answer, and stared at the phone, feeling my hands tremble slightly with emotion. Part of me felt guilty for lashing out at her so harshly, but a much bigger part felt relieved, as if I'd finally said something I'd been holding in for so many years. As the days passed, I began to think that maybe this was really the end, that maybe Mom had finally realized that she had gone too far and decided to leave me alone. I immersed myself in the preparations for the wedding, immersed myself in choosing colors, fabrics, and seating arrangements, grateful for the opportunity to distract myself, but as it turned out, it was just the calm before the storm. About a week later, I was at work when my boss, Mr. Johnson, suddenly called me into his office. As soon as I entered, I immediately felt that something was wrong. There was tension in the air, which immediately made me wary. Mom was there. Mascara was running down her cheeks in black streaks, her eyes were swollen from crying, and Tom was looming over her, looking like he was ready to step in at any second. "Robin." Mom took off, rushing to me, her voice trembling, but there was fury in it, frozen on the verge of hysteria. "How could you be so cruel to your own mother?" I froze in place, stunned by what was happening, trying to realize that it was all real. "Mom," I looked at her in confusion, then turned my gaze to Mr. Johnson, who was sitting at the table with his eyes wide open, clearly not expecting such a performance. "What are you doing here?" Mom turned to him, as if remembering his presence, and launched a new attack. "Mr. Johnson, you have to talk some sense into her." She screamed, gesturing wildly between herself and Tom. "She's breaking her poor mother's heart." I saw my boss freeze, not knowing how to react. He stammered, giving me a confused look. But Mom didn't calm down. "She won't let her parents walk her down the aisle," she exclaimed, nodding at Tom, who was standing behind her with a face that clearly showed bewilderment mixed with annoyance. "Can you believe it? After all we've done for her?" Before anyone could respond, Mom grabbed Tom's hand and, wiping her tears, ran out of the office, slamming the door loudly. In the silence that followed, I felt all the blood drain from my face, and Mr. Johnson leaned heavily back in his chair, still not fully understanding what had just happened. "Robin," he finally said, looking at me intently. "I think you owe me an explanation of what the hell is going on here." I took a deep breath, gathering my thoughts, and began to tell the story. To my surprise, Mr. Johnson's face softened when I finished speaking, and although his eyes were still attentive and wary, they no longer had the cold professional look with which he usually assessed subordinates. He took a deep breath, ran his hand over his chin as if considering what he had said, and then shook his head and spoke slowly. "You know, Robin, your mother reminds me a lot of my ex-wife," he said with a grin that held no humor. "We got divorced precisely because of her dramatic tendencies. She always did everything so that attention was focused only on her, never thinking about how her actions affected others." I felt relieved, not because Mr. Johnson had a complicated family history, but because he understood how I felt, knew what I was going through, and wasn't going to judge me for it. "So you understand," I said softly, not hiding the hope in my voice. He nodded, looked at me with obvious sympathy, and continued. "Yes, and I want you to know that I'm on your side. This is your wedding day, Robin. He should be the way you want him to be, not your mother or her boyfriend." I felt a heavy weight being lifted from my shoulders, which I had been carrying all my life, a weight that pressed down, forcing me to adjust, please, and try to avoid another conflict. Now I didn't have to justify myself or look for ways to explain my decision. Mr. Johnson understood everything without unnecessary words. "Thank you, Mr. Johnson," I said with sincere gratitude, and he smiled faintly, but then his face became serious again. "However," he added, folding his hands on the table, "we cannot allow such scenes in the office. This is unprofessional, destructive, and endangers not only your reputation, but the work of the entire team. I need you to deal with this situation so that it doesn't happen again." When I left his office, the feeling of relief was replaced by anger, which flooded me with such force that for a moment I even stopped noticing that I was walking around the office. How dare Mom come to my workplace, make a scene in front of my boss, try to manipulate me, threaten my future? She could have jeopardized my entire career just because she couldn't accept that I wasn't going to play by her rules anymore. My first stop was at the security post. I found Dave, the head of security, who had been working in this building for several years and always kept calm and confident, but at that moment, when I stepped up to him with a stone face and a phone in my hand, he immediately straightened up and looked at me questioningly. "We need to discuss something," I said, turning on the screen and showing him a picture of Mom and Tom. "These two should not be allowed into the building under any circumstances. If they show up, call the police immediately." Dave studied the picture carefully, and then looked at me, not asking any questions, just nodded and answered clearly. "Acknowledged, Robin. They won't come here anymore." I returned to my desk, opened my laptop, and immediately began typing a message, my fingers fluttering across the keyboard at such a speed that I could barely follow the words that were coming out on the screen. "Mom, your behavior today was completely unacceptable. You had no right to come to my work, make a scene, involve my boss in your manipulations. You could have jeopardized my career with your selfish actions, and I'm not going to take it anymore. I tried to be patient, I tried to explain my feelings to you, but you refused to listen, and now let me be very clear. You're not invited to my wedding anymore, and neither is Tom. I'm asking you, no, I'm demanding that you stay away from me. Don't call, don't text, don't show up at my place of work or at my place of residence. If you don't respect my boundaries, I'll have no choice but to go to court. Robin." I reread the message, held my finger over the send button for a moment, then pressed it firmly and leaned back, taking a deep breath. It was painful and hard for me, but strangely enough, I also felt a certain release. I finally put an end to what had been tormenting me for so long. That evening, when I told Jake about everything that had happened, he listened attentively to me, and then hugged me tightly. His arms were safe, his warmth penetrated inside, filling all the voids that years of living with my mother had left inside me. "I'm so sorry you had to go through this," he said, running his fingers lightly down my back. "But I'm proud of you. You finally stood up for yourself." We called my grandparents, then Jake's parents, explained the situation, and to my great relief, they all supported me. No one told me that I had to make concessions, that I needed to try to understand Mom or give her another chance. Everyone who truly loved me accepted my decision and stood by my side. That night, Jake and I sat down at the kitchen table and began reviewing the guest list, looking through the names and crossing out those who should no longer be present at our celebration. When I ran my pen along the line with Mom's name, then Tom's name, I felt a strange mix of emotions: bitterness, fatigue, but at the same time, incredible relief. Now our wedding will be smaller, but on this day we will be surrounded only by those who really love and support us. Jake looked at me carefully, squeezed my hand, which was warm and reliable, and there was no hesitation in it, and asked quietly, "Are you okay?" I looked into his eyes, full of love, care, and endless patience, and suddenly I felt a new wave of gratitude wash over me for being there for him, for never making me feel unloved, unnecessary, for never doubting me. "Yes," I replied, interlacing our fingers and giving his hand a little squeeze in return. "I really think so." And for the first time in many years, I said it without doubting my words. I felt like I was taking control of my life, setting boundaries that I was previously afraid of, and finally allowing myself to be around people who genuinely care about me. Everything was not happening the way I once imagined, but despite everything, I had a feeling inside that everything was going the way it should be. The day I had dreamed of for so long had finally arrived, a day that seemed almost unreal until the morning came, filled with the excited whispers of the bridesmaids, the light scent of flowers, and the rustle of my dress fabric as I stood in front of the mirror, trying to realize that this was it, this moment, which Jake and I have been waiting for, which we have been preparing for so long, which, despite all the obstacles, has finally arrived. Now I was standing at the door of the chapel, feeling my heart flutter in my chest, my fingers tremble slightly, while grandfather, elegant in his black tuxedo, squeezed my hand in a quiet, soothing gesture full of love and support, and at that moment I realized that despite all the chaos that accompanied the preparation for the wedding, despite Mom's attempts to ruin the day, I'm here, I'm ready, I'm happy. The music began to rise, filling the space with gentle melodies. A solemn silence reigned in the hall, and my grandfather and I took the first step. But before we could enter the chapel, before I could take a breath, a shrill, high-pitched voice cut through the air, which instantly squeezed everything inside me. "Stop it." I froze, turning my head towards the sound, and I didn't even need to look to figure out who it was. Mom was rushing down the aisle, her face flushed, her eyes burning with anger or madness, and Tom was following her like a faithful dog, looking less confident than usual, but still not trying to stop her. "You'll step aside," she sharply pointed a finger at her grandfather, her chest heaving with heavy breathing, and her voice trembled, although not from emotion, but from barely restrained anger. "Tom is walking Robin down the aisle." I stared at her in disbelief, not believing that even now, on this day, when I was sure that I had finally been able to set boundaries, that I had finally been able to let her know that she could no longer control my life, she was still trying to make a show of it, still trying to manipulate me. As if everything I said didn't matter to her. "Mom," my voice was low and steady, but there was a steel ring in it that I didn't try to hide. "What are you doing here? You weren't invited. Please go away." Her face twitched, and for a second her expression changed from annoyance to unexpected self-pity, and as soon as I noticed it, tears immediately appeared in her eyes, running down her cheeks in large drops. Her lips trembled, her shoulders slumped, as if the whole world had collapsed on her at once. "How can you be so cruel?" Her voice broke, and she took a step forward, as if hoping I'd drop everything, and rushed to comfort her. "I raised you. I loved you after your father died." But before I could answer, Grandpa, who had been silent watching the scene with a stony face, finally spoke. His voice was even, but there was a firmness in it that left no room for objections. "Carol, that's enough," he said calmly but firmly, and a tense silence reigned in the hall. People were watching what was happening attentively. Some looked shocked, some sympathetic, and some even with a barely noticeable grin, because, apparently, Mom's theatricality did not attract her new friends. Fans. Everyone here knows the truth about who really raised Robin. I looked around, glancing at the faces of the guests, and saw how my mother noticed it too, saw how the atmosphere had changed, how her attempt to play the victim had no effect, how her plaintive words did not touch anyone, except maybe herself. Her tactics changed abruptly, as if switching from desperation to anger on a snap. "Great," she spat out, staggering back, her face contorted into an expression of disdain. "I don't need you, Robin. I have Tom, he appreciates me, unlike you. You've always been stupid and arrogant. I disowned you long before this day." Before I could reply, before my lips had even begun to form words, Grandpa coldly intervened, his voice sounding distant, almost formal. "Well, Carol, if that's what you think, then I have something to say too." He paused, his icy gaze boring into Mom's face. "You are no longer welcome in my house. Yes, in my house. And I'm cutting you out of my will." The change in Tom's behavior was so quick and so predictable that I almost laughed. He paled, his eyes darted, and he took a step back, as if he suddenly realized that all his confidence, all his play at being a caring partner, had lost their meaning at once. Carol, I'm sorry, but I didn't sign up for all this drama," he muttered, taking another step back. "Plus, without a house and inheritance, well, let's just say I think I'd better find a younger girlfriend. We're done here." Mom's face was contorted with rage, her hands clenched into fists, her chest heaved, as if she was barely holding back a scream that eventually burst out, filled with impotent anger. "You're all against me." "Stop it," she screamed, clutching at her hair. "How dare you? I'll show you." Before she could finish her threat, two policemen, whom one of the guests had called quietly and unnoticeably, were already nearby. One of them stepped forward, his voice was even, professional, brooking no objections. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to come with us." When they took my mother away, her screams echoed through the chapel, but I no longer listened to them, did not delve into the meaning, did not try to understand her feelings. Instead, I felt a strange mix of emotions, relief, sadness, and, oddly enough, a little pity. It was her bottom, her moment of falling, and part of me hoped that maybe this would be the signal for her to change. 30 minutes later, after I had touched up my makeup, after the adrenaline had subsided and my breathing had finally steadied, I was standing at the chapel door again. My grandfather's hand was in mine again, and as we walked down the aisle, I saw Jake waiting for me at the altar, his face filled with love, care, and the moment our eyes met, all the drama of the last hour disappeared, vanished, and no longer mattered. The ceremony was wonderful, filled with laughter, happy tears, and warm words, and when Jake and I shared our first kiss as husband and wife, I knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, we would overcome them together, surrounded by the love and support of our real family. During the wedding reception, when the hall was filled with laughter, the ringing sound of glasses, interspersed with joyful shouts from the guests, and melodious music playing somewhere in the background, guest after guest came up to Jake and me to offer words of support, praise the wonderful ceremony and, of course, express their opinion about the recent fiasco with Mom. "You handled it like a champion, Robin," my college roommate said, hugging me tightly and in a friendly way, his smile sincere, warm, full of admiration. "Your mom's a little cheeky," Jake's uncle grumbled, chuckling and taking a long swig of champagne. "But you showed her what a real classroom looks like." I smiled gratefully at everyone, feeling how with every new warm word, with every gesture of support, I was filled with a feeling of lightness, liberation, as if the weight that I had been carrying for years had finally evaporated, disappeared into thin air, leaving only pure, genuine happiness. And when in the evening, already in the shining wedding car, Jake and I left, going on our honeymoon. I felt a sense of peace fill me completely. The drama with my mom was behind me, closed like the turned-over page of a book that I wasn't going to reread anymore. Now we had a whole new life ahead of us, full of possibilities, discoveries, and adventures, and I couldn't wait to find out what it would bring. A year has passed since our wedding, and life has found a calm, even rhythm, some kind of new comfort, previously unknown to me, where every morning began with the aroma of coffee mixed with the sun's rays penetrating through the curtains, where I woke up knowing that next to me was a person to whom I could entrust everything, where each day was not a chain of dramatic events, but a sequence of small joys. Jake and I live in a small but cozy apartment, just a stone's throw from our offices. It's not huge, it doesn't have spacious halls or high ceilings, but it's our space, our fortress, our home, where everything is chosen with love, where every detail reminds us of our common path. Every morning we go to work together, holding hands, discussing plans for the future, building dreams that no longer seem like something distant and unattainable. The house I grew up in, where my mother lived, now brings us a stable rental income, and I am pleased to think that a place full of chaos and anxiety is now serving someone else, perhaps a young family who is building their happiness there. We turned it into something positive, using this money to save for the future, and sometimes allowing ourselves small joys, spontaneous weekend trips, new experiences, moments that will stay with us forever. As for my mother, I hear about her from time to time, random rumors passed on through acquaintances or caught a glimpse from my grandmother. They say that she rents a small apartment on the other side of the city and, as always, continues to look for her soulmate, as if believing that happiness is someone else, someone who is about to appear in her life and fill the void that she herself does not want to admit. Some things never change. I haven't spoken to her since the wedding day. Sometimes, in rare moments of silence, when the city freezes outside the window and my thoughts float freely, I feel a slight pang of guilt, a feeling as if I should take a step forward, as if I still need to reach out, but then I remember the years of chaos, the constant drama. I remember how she tried to steal one of the most important days in my life, and I realized that I made the right choice. One sunny Saturday morning, when Jake and I were having breakfast on our tiny balcony, basking in the soft light filtering through the branches of the trees, he suddenly put down his cup of coffee, looked at me attentively, and asked quietly, "Do you ever think about contacting your mom?" I took a sip of coffee, lingering the taste on my tongue, letting the question settle in my head, thinking about it, trying on possible answers. Sometimes, I admitted with a slight shrug. But then I remember how peaceful our life has become, how drama-free it is, and I realize that I'm not ready to risk it. Jake nodded, accepting my answer without argument, without trying to convince me of anything, without judging, just nodded, because he always accepted me for who I am. "You know that I will support any decision you make, right?" I smiled, reached across the table and squeezed his hand in mine, feeling the warmth, feeling how firmly and confidently he holds me, as if saying without words that I will never be alone again. "I know," I replied softly, and it meant everything to me. Later that day, we were walking in the park, enjoying the light breeze, unhurried steps, and the joyful noise of children playing nearby, and when we passed one of the lawns, I noticed a mother and daughter sitting on a spread-out blanket. They were laughing with their heads close together, whispering to each other something that only they understood, something that connected them with a special, invisible thread. For a moment, I felt pain from what I had never had, from what could have been, but then my thoughts shifted to my grandparents, who call me every Sunday without exception, just to talk, to find out how I am, to remind me that they are always there. I thought about Jake's parents, who from day one accepted me as their daughter, surrounded me with care, without demanding anything in return. I remembered our friends, those who had rallied around us during the wedding chaos, those who from that moment on had become not just close, but a real family. And suddenly I realized that family is not always blood, not always those who are genetically related to you, not always those who should have loved you by definition. Family is people who support you, who see you for real, who don't use you for their own benefit, but just love you for who you are, without conditions, without expectations. And in this sense, I was rich beyond my wildest dreams.